Where's the proof? Or is this just another sob story from a broke pastry girl? The room fell silent. Lena stood there, hands dusted with flour, eyes fixed holding a printed copy of the recipe her late brother had submitted 8 years ago. The manager leaned back in his chair, smirking like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Where's the proof? Or is this just another sob story from a broke pastry girl? Who do you think they'll believe, me or you? No one noticed that the new trainee standing quietly in the corner was Jackson Reeves, the actual CEO of Golden Harvest Undercover. And when he walked out of that room, everything at the company began to change from contracts to titles to who still had a job. Have you ever been looked down on because of where you came from or what you do for a living? Comment 1 if you have, and you still haven't forgotten that feeling. 2 if you haven't, and hope you never have to experience it. Jackson Reeves stared at his reflection in the mirror of a cheap motel room on the outskirts of Seattle. The salt and pepper beard he'd grown over the past 2 weeks had filled in just enough to make him look tired but harmless. His tailored suits were back at his condo in San Francisco, replaced now by thrift store jeans, a plain sweatshirt, and a ball cap that shaded his face just enough. He ruffled his intentionally messy hair and nodded. The disguise was complete. "So, Evan," he muttered to the mirror, trying on the alias one more time, ready for your first shift at Golden Harvest. He almost laughed. 15 years ago, he had mortgaged everything he owned to open the first Golden Harvest location. He'd kneaded dough himself, scrubbed ovens, and slept on flour sacks when he couldn't afford an apartment. Now, with 37 stores across the country and his name etched into the Forbes Leaders to Watch list, he couldn't walk into one of his bakeries without being recognized, or worse, rehearsed for. Which was why he was here. The numbers didn't lie, profit margins were shrinking. Employee turnover had spiked and some of the flagship stores were sending up red flags. He had hired consultants, analysts, even a customer experience firm. None of them could tell him why Seattle's highest-rated location, beloved by Yelp and adored by food critics, was barely breaking even. His father's words echoed in his head. Sometimes you gotta get your hands in the flour if you want to know why the bread's going stale. Jackson grabbed his backpack and stepped into the 4 a.m. chill. The air had that crisp edge of Pacific Northwest spring, damp, quiet, slightly electric. He walked to his rented sedan, nothing flashy, and drove toward the city center parking 2 blocks from the bakery. From the outside, the Golden Harvest flagship location looked exactly how he'd designed it. Warm-toned brick gold signage and an old-world charm nestled between modern high-rises. But what he saw inside caught him off guard. The lights were already on. It was 4:45 a.m. Through the large front window he saw a lone woman in the kitchen. Auburn hair tied in a tight bun, sleeves rolled, movements precise. She wasn't just prepping ingredients. She was shaping morning buns, rolling, cutting, and folding with a fluid grace that could only come from thousands of repetitions. She didn't glance up once, didn't pause. It was like watching a symphony performed by a single instrument. At exactly 5:00 a.m., the front door unlocked with a buzz. A tall man in his early 30s with a name tag that read Logan Pierce opened it and smiled politely. "You must be Evan," he said. New trainee from corporate Jackson nodded, adjusting his posture into the mild slouch he'd practiced. "Yeah. Appreciate you taking me in on short notice." "No problem," Logan replied, waving him in. "They've been sending folks out to align local processes or whatever. Corporate stuff." He rolled his eyes, not disrespectfully, but with the weariness of someone who'd had one too many memos sent from someone who never pulled a baking tray out of a 400-degree oven. Interesting, Jackson thought. The alignment initiative had been his idea. Logan led him past empty display cases and polished tile floors toward the back. The air smelled like butter cinnamon and toasted sugar, rich and indulgent. The kind of smell that made people pause outside the window and walk in even if they hadn't meant to. They reached the kitchen. The woman he'd seen earlier didn't look up. "That's Lena," Logan whispered, lowering his voice like they were in church. She handles the morning buns and all the artisan prep. Been here longer than I have. Doesn't talk much. Real particular about her space." Jackson said nothing. He just watched. Her hands moved with the kind of muscle memory that only came from obsession. She wasn't just a good baker, she was world-class. Even in silence, there was something magnetic about her. He'd seen this before, years ago, in himself. "What time did she come in?" Jackson asked. "She's always here by 4:30, Logan said. "Sometimes earlier. Technically, we start prep at 5. She just shows up and works." The morning passed in a blur of introductions and equipment walkthroughs. Jackson played his part asking how to load the industrial mixer, pretending he'd never measured yeast before. Logan was patient-helpful and clearly a competent floor lead, but Jackson's eyes kept drifting to Lena. Every tray she slid into the oven looked flawless. Her morning buns, coiled tight with brown sugar and cinnamon, came out caramelized and golden glistening just enough to catch the light. By 7 a.m., the line out front wrapped around the block. Customers came in, ordered her pastries by name, and walked out beaming. Around 9 a.m., during a lull, Jackson approached Logan. "Those buns are incredible. Hers." "All hers," Logan said. "People drive across the city for them. She doesn't do interviews, doesn't pose for promo photos, doesn't even want her name on the board. Just works. She must be valuable." "Invaluable," Logan replied. Then, after a pause, "But she's a mystery. Doesn't talk much, doesn't hang out after shifts, works 6 days a week, sometimes doubles, never takes time off." Jackson nodded slowly. He knew that look, that pace, that kind of work ethic didn't come from ambition, it came from survival. And something told him Lena Hart wasn't just baking for a paycheck, she was baking for a reason. By mid-morning, Jackson had learned the rhythm of the floor well enough to stay out of the way. Logan kept the team moving with quiet efficiency, checking prep sheets, coordinating with the front of house, and stepping in wherever hands were short. The bakery hummed like a well-oiled machine, but it was clear who made the wheels turn. Lena. Every tray that emerged from her station sold out before the next batch even cooled. Customers who came in for coffee left with boxes of morning buns. Several asked by name if she was working that day. Some even left notes of thanks folded between receipts and tucked into the tip jar. Jackson didn't miss the fact that Lena never looked up. She kept her head down, hands moving apron streaked with flour and sugar. She didn't pause for breaks. Didn't join the others when Logan offered to cover so they could grab coffee. When one of the younger team members, Zach, a college student working part-time, accidentally knocked over a full tray of raw dough near her station, Lena didn't scold him. She didn't even sigh. She knelt down beside the mess and said softly, "First rule of baking: accidents happen." She salvaged what she could, her hands, fast and sure movements, precise and unbothered. Jackson stepped forward to help, but Lena raised a flour-covered hand without even looking at him. "I've got this. You're new. You should be learning the front counter with Logan." Her eyes flicked to his just once, brown steady, unreadable, and then she went back to shaping dough. There was no arrogance in her voice, no irritation, just a quiet boundary that told him she was used to doing things alone and intended to keep it that way. Later that afternoon, during the post-lunch prep rush, Jackson was reassigned to the kitchen. The head baker on duty that day, Rafael Cruz, gave him light-duty tasks, portioning butter cleaning trays, replenishing flour bins. It was clear Rafael had been instructed to keep the corporate guy out of anything critical. But then, a large pre-order came in 6 dozen almond morning buns for a nearby corporate brunch. "All hands," Rafael called out. "Evan, help Lena." Jackson approached her station slowly. She didn't look up, but she slid over a round of dough without a word. "Fold like this," she said, demonstrating with a speed that seemed impossible for something so delicate. Not too tight, not too loose. Jackson copied her motions clumsily on purpose. He could have done it with his eyes closed. Years ago, he'd taught staff across the country how to roll and proof dough, but today he was a trainee, and Lena was watching. She noticed immediately. "Here," she said, and placed her hands over his to guide the motion. Feel the tension in the dough. It'll tell you what it needs. Her hands were worn small scars, calluses, the occasional burn. The kind of hands that told a story of long hours and little rest. As she adjusted his folding technique, Jackson spotted something peeking from beneath the cuff of her sleeve. A tattoo. A small flame. Simple black ink just above the wrist. "You've done this before," she said suddenly, her tone sharper now. Jackson blinked. "Just good with my hands, I guess." Lena studied him for a long moment. Then without another word, she returned to her work. "Well," she muttered, "you're not terrible. That's more than I can say for most trainees they send us." The rest of the shift passed in a blur of flour heat and quiet exchanges. By the end of the day, Jackson's back ached. His shoulders protested and his feet reminded him that he hadn't done a real kitchen shift in over a decade. But Lena, she was still going. Cleaning the ovens, reorganizing dry storage, refilling the sugar bin. At one point, she dragged a 50-pound sack of flour across the prep area without asking for help. Raphael noticed and spoke up. "Lena, you don't have to do that. We can split it." "I don't mind," she replied. By the time the bakery closed, Jackson watched her scrub the entire kitchen floor by hand while the others prepped for the next day. When the last customer had long gone and the lights in the front dimmed, Lena removed her apron and washed her hands in silence. She didn't join the staff heading out for drinks. She didn't check her phone. She didn't linger. She walked out of the back door alone. Curious Jackson followed at a distance. Out in the alley behind the bakery, she approached a rusted bike chained to a lamppost. She clipped a small backpack to the rear rack, checked the tires, and pedaled off into traffic. No car, no Uber, no subway pass. Just a battered bicycle, a silent exit, and a woman who baked like her life depended on it. That night in his motel room, Jackson sat at the edge of the bed with his laptop open and his notes sprawled across the comforter. The store's operations were running like clockwork. The team was competent. The products, especially Lena's, were exceptional. But something didn't add up. Why would someone this skilled, this consistent, with this much influence on store revenue be making standard wages? Why would she avoid promotion, recognition, even tips? Jackson opened the employee database and pulled up her file. Lena Hart, age 34, hired 8 years ago. Role, artisan pastry prep. Performance reviews, excellent. Promotions offered, declined. Then he noticed a flag in the payroll notes, a recurring third-party deduction labeled Hamilton Financial. He leaned back, frowning. 8 years. No advancement, no vacations. A constant need for extra hours. A history of declining every raise above base. And now, financial records showing debt payments to one of the most predatory loan companies on the West Coast. He whispered the words aloud. What are you really working for, Lena Hart? And why did it feel like he was only beginning to understand the tip of something much deeper? By his third day undercover, Jackson had settled into a rhythm. He arrived each morning at 4:50 a.m., 10 minutes before his shift, only to find Lena already deep in her work. The same soft light glowed from the kitchen, the same quiet discipline filled the air. She greeted him with a nod and no words, her hands already in motion. He tied his apron and moved to his station, but his mind remained on the woman who never slowed down. During the previous day's shift, he'd casually asked other team members about her. Their answers had only deepened the mystery. Lena's been here forever, said Zach, the college student who worked the morning rush. People ask for her by name, but she never comes out front. Says the dough needs her more than people do. You know what's weird, added Kayla, who handled the register. Last Christmas, some of the regulars left crazy big tips, like specifically for her. She made us split them evenly. Said she didn't want special treatment. Jackson listened closely. The picture they painted didn't match the numbers in the company's files. This wasn't an average team member. Lena was central to customer retention and revenue at this location. And yet, she had refused recognition at every turn. As he prepped dough at the back station, he watched Lena work with the efficiency of someone who couldn't afford wasted motion. When Raphael offered her a break after 3 uninterrupted hours on her feet, she simply shook her head and kept folding. At lunch, Jackson made sure to sit near Logan, who was updating the schedule on a shared staff terminal. "Hey," Jackson said, unwrapping his sandwich. "Can I ask something kind of weird?" Logan looked up. "Shoot. If Lena's so good, how come she isn't managing the pastry section? Seems like a no-brainer." Logan exhaled slowly, lowering his voice. "She's been offered. Multiple times. Always turns it down. Why?" He glanced around to make sure they were alone. "Between us, I think there's something going on. Not like bad, just complicated. Last year, corporate sent some recognition thing for her 10-year anniversary. She wouldn't let us put it up. Said she wasn't comfortable with attention." Jackson frowned. He remembered signing off on that very memo. He'd never been told it was rejected at the store level. There was also this article, Logan continued. Some food blog called her Buns transcendent. They wanted to interview her. She shut it down. And the salary, Jackson asked carefully. Payroll once messed up and gave her a big raise accidental jump in tier. She flagged it herself and asked them to fix it, before anyone noticed. Jackson leaned back slightly, processing. That was rare. There's more, Logan added. Sometimes she asks to split her paycheck into 2 deposits, one to her account and one to some external place. HR helped set it up years ago. Not standard procedure, but she insisted. The name from the file popped back into Jackson's mind, Hamilton Financial. His instincts kicked in. That kind of financial setup usually raised red flags. He'd seen it before, under-the-table obligations, wage garnishments, or private repayment agreements. But this didn't feel like embezzlement. It felt like something else, something heavier. Later that afternoon, a delayed shipment of specialty flour arrived too late to process during business hours but too important to leave for the next day. It was a 2-hour job minimum. "I'll stay," Lena said instantly before anyone else could speak. "But you opened today," Raphael pointed out. "That's a 14-hour day." "I don't mind." Jackson stood nearby, pretending to wipe down a prep surface as he watched the exchange. No one seemed surprised. It was as if Lena volunteering for punishing shifts had become a routine expectation. Miguel hesitated, then turned to Jackson. "You okay? Staying too?" "We can tag team it." Jackson agreed. Anything to spend more time observing. Once the front lights dimmed and the rest of the crew left, he and Lena began organizing the bulk storage room. She worked with the same silent focus she had that morning, only now shadows had bloomed under her eyes and her motions had a faint tremor he hadn't noticed before. At 9:30 p.m., with the last of the flowers stacked and labeled, Jackson watched her linger near the manager's office. She hesitated, then knocked gently. Inside, Monica Fields, the store's general manager, was finishing the weekly report. "Sorry to bother you," Lena said quietly. "Was wondering if I could pick up some extra shifts next week. Maybe cover Madison's mornings if she's still out." Monica looked up, concern flickering across her face. "Lena, you're already clocking overtime. I can't authorize more hours without corporate approval." Lena nodded quickly. "What if I clock out at 8, then just stayed to help?" "Off the books." "You know I can't let you do that," Monica said gently. A pause. "It's just that I really need the Lena caught herself." Her voice trailed off. She shook her head. "Never mind. Sorry to ask." She stepped out of the office with her face composed, but Jackson, watching from across the kitchen, caught the moment her eyes flickered. Not tired, not annoyed, desperate. She grabbed her coat, pulled out her phone, and stared at the screen. Her shoulders stiffened. Back at the motel that night, Jackson sat in silence. The image of Lena, head bowed, voice trembling, hands steady from years of repetition but shaking ever so slightly now, stayed with him. Whatever she was fighting. It wasn't just debt. It was something worse, debt with no end. He opened his laptop and connected to Golden Harvest's secure HR portal. He needed to know exactly what Lena Hart was paying and who was collecting. What he found stopped him cold. The external account wasn't a savings fund. It wasn't an IRA. It wasn't even child support or medical debt. It was labeled clearly Creditor Payment, Hamilton Financial Services, and the payment schedule monthly. recurring, for over 7 years. Lena wasn't working to live. She was working to survive something she had never even signed for. The next morning arrived with Jackson no closer to sleep than he'd been at midnight. The discovery of Lena's long-standing financial arrangement with Hamilton Financial had sent him down a rabbit hole of late-night digging internal company records, archived employee submissions, and public business databases. What he found left him feeling hollow. Hamilton Financial wasn't just any lender. They specialized in high-interest rescue loans to small business owners, often the kind who had nowhere else to turn. Their contracts were airtight. Their interest rates were brutal. They were the kind of institution that hovered like vultures around desperate people with dreams. And Lena had been paying them for over 7 years. Yet the principal balance had barely moved. That morning, as he walked into the bakery, the familiar smell of butter and cinnamon couldn't mask the bitterness in his mouth. Lena was already at her station. Of course, she was methodically rolling out the dough for another batch of morning buns. But her movements were slower, the dark circles under her eyes deeper, her spine slightly more hunched. "Rough night?" Jackson asked as he tied his apron beside her. She didn't look up, just the usual. But it wasn't the usual, not for anyone. Today, Jackson had a new objective. During his lunch break, while Monica was distracted by a delivery issue, he slipped into the manager's office. Her terminal was still open, another oversight he made a mental note to address once he returned to his real position. He pulled up Lena's employee file again, this time scanning for emergency contacts. One name appeared: Jason Hart. Same last name, likely a brother. Jackson ran a quick search through the HR system and cross-referenced it with public records. His stomach tightened. Jason Hart. Deceased. Date of death: 7 years ago. Cause: car accident on Interstate 5. Time of incident: approximately 1 month after a business fire. It couldn't be a coincidence. Why would Lena be paying off a debt tied to someone who was no longer alive? Later that afternoon, Jackson volunteered to make a supply run to a sister location across town. It was the perfect excuse. That location was managed by Caroline Madison, a regional supervisor who'd been with Golden Harvest for more than a decade. If anyone remembered Lena's early days, it would be her. Jackson kept his cover as Evan, the corporate trainee, and approached Caroline while she was reviewing vendor invoices. "I'm looking into employee retention strategies," he began casually. "Just curious about folks who've been around a long time. Do you remember when Lena Hart was hired?" Caroline's face softened immediately. "Lena, of course I do. That poor girl." Jackson leaned in quietly. "She doesn't talk much, hard to get a read on her." Caroline nodded slowly. "She came to us right after everything happened with her brother." Her brother Jackson prompted. "Jason. They had a little bakery together, north end of the city, Heart and Hearth, I think it was called, just the two of them. Parents had passed. Jason handled the books. Lena did the baking. Their morning buns were something else even back then. What happened?" Caroline sighed. "The recession hit hard. Jason took out a big loan to expand, renovate, buy new equipment. But the bank that pre-approved them folded before the paperwork finalized. They were scrambling. He ended up finding a private lender, but the terms were awful. Jackson didn't have to ask who the lender was. Then there was a fire. Faulty wiring in the new ovens, from what I heard. Insurance wouldn't cover it, something about the permits not being finalized." A month later, Jason drove off the highway. Silence settled between them, and Lena, she walked into our downtown store with flowers still on her sleeves. Said she needed work. Any work. She wasn't the same after that. Hollow, but steady. Like someone who was going to keep moving no matter what. On the drive back to the flagship location, Jackson pulled out his phone and accessed Golden Harvest's internal archives, specifically the product development folders from 8 years ago. He searched for any mention of Jason Hart. Nothing under acquisitions, nothing under vendor partnerships. Then, in an archived subfolder under unsolicited submissions, he found it. A scanned PDF dated and time-stamped. Submission proposal. Jason Hart, subject, signature. Sourdough formula attached was a detailed pitch ingredient ratios fermentation schedules, proofing techniques, projected cost margins, and even a short write-up on market differentiation. The status at the top read, rejected, no fit for brand direction. Jackson frowned. The formatting, the language, the timing. It all aligned with the launch of Golden Harvest's Heritage Sourdough line, released 6 months later. He accessed the executive-only portal and pulled up the formula currently used in stores. The ratios were nearly identical. The base ingredients, fermentation temperature, flour composition, all matched the proposal Jason Hart had submitted. His heart pounded. He dug deeper, accessing archived internal communications from that time period. A series of emails marked internal and confidential surfaced. From Connor Vance to Executive Product Team, subject Innovative Sourdough Formula. Proposal for rollout. Jackson stared at the screen. Connor Vance, then VP of Product Development. The same VP who had left the company 5 years ago under vague allegations of professional misconduct. The same man who'd received a 6-figure bonus for developing the Heritage line. But the formula hadn't been his. It had been Jason Hart's. The same Jason Hart who died a month after losing his bakery believing that his ideas had been worthless. The same Jason whose sister was now working herself to exhaustion to pay off the debt he'd left behind. The next morning, Jackson arrived even earlier than usual, 4:15 a.m. He wasn't surprised to find Lena already there, carefully measuring ingredients with the precision of someone who had done it 1,000 times in silence. "You're early," she noted without looking up. "Couldn't sleep," he replied. Truthfully, he hesitated, then added, "Can I ask you something personal?" Her hands paused. "Depends on the question. The flame tattoo on your wrist. What does it mean?" For the first time, he saw her expression falter. Pain flickered across her face before she schooled it back into neutrality. "It's to remember something I lost." She returned to her work movements, slightly less fluid. "Something that can't be rebuilt. A bakery," he ventured. Her hands froze. She looked up, eyes suddenly sharp with suspicion. "How did you—" "Heart and Hearth," he said softly. "Your brother Jason's place." The rolling pin in her hand slipped and clattered to the counter. "Who are you?" she whispered. In that moment, looking into her face exhausted, guarded but unbroken, Jackson made a decision. The masquerade had gone far enough. Someone who thinks you've been paying a debt that was never truly yours. She took a step back, arms crossing. "I don't know what you're talking about." Her voice wavered. Jackson reached into his pocket and unfolded a printed document, carefully smoothing it on the counter between them. "Your brother submitted this to Golden Harvest 8 years ago, a sourdough formula. Same ratios, same fermentation process, same blend of heritage grains we've been using ever since." Her eyes scanned the page. Recognition swept across her face like a slow breaking wave. "How did you get this?" "Because I'm not Evan the trainee." He met her eyes fully. "My name is Jackson Reeves. I'm the CEO of Golden Harvest." The color drained from her face. She gripped the edge of the counter. What I've been going undercover to understand why our Seattle store has such strange financial patterns. But what I found was bigger than supply chain inefficiencies." He tapped the document. "This formula, it built our second most profitable product line. And your brother never saw a dime." "That's impossible," she said. "Jason got a rejection letter 2 weeks before the fire." He was crushed. Jackson nodded grimly. "Officially, yes. But unofficially, it was stolen. By Connor Vance, our former VP of Product Development. He lifted your brother's proposal, presented it to the board as his own, and received a substantial bonus. The rejection letter was a cover." Lena's legs gave out and she sank onto a stool. Her face was a storm of confusion, disbelief, and buried grief. "So, all this time, Jason's recipe has been making millions. While you've been working yourself to the bone to repay his loan." The bakery was still quiet, the hum of the refrigeration units the only sound in the background. The city outside remained asleep, unaware of the reckoning brewing in this small kitchen. "I don't understand," she finally said. "Why tell me now? Why not just fire me and sweep this under the rug like everything else?" Jackson pulled up a second stool and sat across from her. "Because what happened to you and your brother was wrong. And because this company, my company, owes you a debt, not the other way around." He pulled out a tablet and opened a financial report. "I've tracked the revenue from the Heritage Sourdough line since launch. Conservative estimates place the value of your brother's contribution at over $4 million. Lena's eyes widened. "That's enough to clear my debt, and then some." Jackson nodded. "I also reviewed the original submission paperwork. There's a clause stating that if we use any part of a submitted concept, compensation must be provided. Vance bypassed that." She stared down at her hands, fingers tightening into knots. "Jason worked on that formula for years. It was our grandfather's base recipe, but he modernized it. He believed it could change everything. When the rejection came, he thought he was a failure. That's why he took the Hamilton loan. He wanted one more chance to prove it had value." Jackson felt the weight of the company's failure settle on his shoulders like cement. "I couldn't sleep the night I connected the dots. I kept thinking about how many mornings I'd enjoyed our sourdough completely unaware of who really created it. While you were here, before dawn, baking just to make another payment." Lena's voice was small. "What happens now?" Before Jackson could answer, the back door opened. Logan and two other early shift employees stepped inside, freezing when they saw the scene before them. Lena seated Jackson beside her documents on the counter. "Evan," Logan asked cautiously, "is everything okay?" Jackson stood slowly, squaring his shoulders. "Logan, I need you to call Monica and ask her to come in right away. Then I want you to contact regional management and request a 9 a.m. emergency meeting." Logan blinked. "I don't think I—" "Tell them Jackson Reeves is calling the meeting." Logan's eyes widened. "Yes." Jackson turned back to Lena. She hadn't moved. "In the meantime, we have some calculations to finish." The next few hours passed in a blur. While the bakery filled with confused staff and increasingly anxious regional managers, Jackson and Lena remained in the office poring over documents, archived communications, and internal reports. By the time the emergency meeting officially began at 9:00 a.m., Jackson had compiled a comprehensive and irrefutable case. Seated around the long table in the back conference room of the Seattle flagship store were 6 members of the Golden Harvest leadership team, most flown in or video patched from neighboring regions. Lena sat quietly beside Jackson, her apron still dusted with flour, hands folded tightly in her lap. Jackson stood at the head of the table. On the wall-mounted screen behind him was a slide titled "Intellectual Property Breach, Heritage Sourdough Line." He didn't waste time. 8 years ago, this company's second most profitable product line was built on a formula submitted by Jason Hart, a local baker who died believing his work was worthless. He clicked again. This is his original proposal, submitted through the official innovation channel. Time-stamped, verified, rejected on paper, but not in practice. He flipped to a slide showing the side-by-side comparison, Jason's ratios fermentation times flour. Blend aligned exactly with the internal version later attributed to Connor Vance. "This is not a coincidence," Jackson said, voice firm. "This is theft." Around the room, faces tightened. Some in disbelief, others in shame. Monica Fields, the store manager, looked like she'd been punched in the gut. Logan stood in the corner, arms folded, watching silently. Lena said nothing. She didn't need to. Click. The next slide showed the compensation package awarded to Vance, over $250,000 in bonuses within 2 years of the Heritage launch. Click again. An internal memo authored by Vance presenting the formula as an in-house innovation. Connor Vance left the company 5 years ago amid unrelated misconduct claims, Jackson said. This issue, however, remained hidden until now. A voice spoke up over Zoom. "This is highly irregular," said Evelyn Granger, chairwoman of the board. "Going undercover without board. Approval, unearthing 8-year-old proposals accusing former executives of IP theft." With respect, Evelyn Jackson interrupted. "What's irregular is that the person whose family built this product has spent the last 8 years working our kitchens to pay off the debt that your stolen formula helped create." He clicked to a live screen share of Golden Harvest's internal product margins. "This formula has generated over $12.4 million in sales. Meanwhile, Lena Hart, Jason's sister and the co-creator of that recipe, has declined every promotion, refused every raise, and continues to pay down a high-interest loan taken to save the bakery your product line replaced." Another voice joined the call, Franklin Doyle, the oldest board member. "What exactly are you proposing?" Jackson didn't flinch. "3 things. First, immediate debt relief. Golden Harvest will pay off Lena Hart's outstanding balance with Hamilton Financial." Murmurs spread through the room. "Second, retroactive compensation for the use of her brother's intellectual property. Based on industry standards and comparable acquisitions, that number sits at $3.2 million. "That's absurd," said Stephen Langford, the CFO. "We can't just—" Third Jackson said, overriding him, "We create a new position, Head of Artisan Product Development. Lena will oversee our handcrafted bread and pastry line with full creative control and executive-level compensation, including profit sharing." "You're overstepping," Evelyn said, her tone sharpening. "This hasn't been reviewed." "Then review it," Jackson said coolly. "Or I'll release this story, including internal emails, documents, and a timeline of negligence, to Food and Culture Weekly. They've already expressed interest in profiling our heritage line. I doubt they'd mind featuring the real creator." Silence. Heavy and sharp. "You wouldn't drag your own company through the mud," Franklin said, though there was uncertainty in his voice. "I would do what's necessary to restore the company's integrity," Jackson replied. "The damage wasn't done by telling the truth. It was done by hiding it." Then, from beside him, a quiet voice broke through the tension. "I'd like to say something," Lena said. Every eye turned to her. She didn't stand. She didn't raise her voice. But there was something unshakable in the way she sat back straight, jaw firm, flour still in the creases of her hands. "For 8 years," she began, "I've come in before the sun. I've stayed after closing. I've worked through holidays, weekends, and every kind of personal milestone most people get to celebrate." She looked directly at the screen where the board members watched. "Not because I love Golden Harvest, but because I owed a debt, and I wanted to make sure my brother's name wasn't the only thing that survived what happened to us." Her voice strengthened. "I watched customers enjoy a product he perfected. I watched someone else get the credit, and I stayed silent because I thought it was the only way to keep going." She paused. "I don't want your millions. I want my brother's name on his creation. I want to finish paying off the debt that buried him, and I want your company to stop treating ideas like they're free to take." The room was silent. Even Langford looked chastened. After a long moment, Evelyn spoke again, more measured this time. "Miss Hart, would you give us 30 minutes to deliberate?" Lena nodded once. "Of course." The screen went dark. Jackson turned to her. "Are you okay?" She exhaled shakily. "I don't know." 35 minutes later, the board call resumed. The screen blinked to life with a silent tension that seemed to stretch the walls of the small conference room. Evelyn Granger cleared her throat, her face unreadable. "After review and discussion with the board and legal counsel, we are prepared to issue a formal response." Jackson leaned back in his chair but said nothing. Beside him, Lena sat as she had before, still composed and somehow stronger than she had been an hour ago. "We acknowledge," Evelyn continued, "that Golden Harvest failed to properly investigate the origin of the formula used in the Heritage sourdough line. Based on documentation submitted by Mr. Reeves and our own archived materials, it is evident that Jason Hart's original submission was utilized without consent, credit, or compensation." A pause. Small but significant. This represents a breach of our own intellectual property ethics and corporate values. Therefore, the board has unanimously voted to accept the CEO's proposal in full." Lena didn't move. Effective immediately, Evelyn said, "Golden Harvest will assume and settle the outstanding debt Lena Hart has been paying to Hamilton Financial Services. In addition, we will issue a formal acknowledgement of Jason Hart as the originator of the formula both internally and on public-facing materials tied to the Heritage sourdough line. This includes packaging, marketing, and store signage." Lena's throat tightened. Furthermore, Evelyn continued, "Lena Hart will be offered the role of Head of Artisan Product Development. The offer includes executive-level compensation, full creative control, and an annual profit-sharing arrangement retroactive to the launch of the product line. Final legal documents will be drawn up and signed within 5 business days." For the first time, Lena blinked in disbelief. "You're serious?" Evelyn nodded. "We are. And we apologize for everything." The call ended. Silence settled over the room. Logan, who had quietly stepped in toward the end of the call, broke it with a low whistle. Holy hell. Jackson stood gently, pushing back his chair. "You okay?" he asked Lena again. She nodded. "I think so." He handed her a folder. "That's a draft of your offer letter. You can take your time reviewing it. Bring in counsel. Do whatever you need to do. There's no pressure." She took it with both hands like it weighed more than paper ever should. "Why did you do this?" she asked. Jackson hesitated, then spoke the truth. "Because I remember what it's like to owe more than you make in a year. I remember what it's like to walk into a bank and be offered a smile with a 24% interest rate behind it. I remember losing someone I loved and feeling like I'd failed them by not fighting harder." He looked at her, really looked at her. "But mostly because if we're building a company that rewards theft over talent, silence over courage, then I don't want my name on it anymore." Lena's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Instead, she asked, "Can I show you something?" She led him back into the kitchen. The ovens had cooled. The scent of cinnamon and sugar had faded. But on a prep table in the corner sat a notebook, weathered fraying pages marked with years of flour and ink. She opened it carefully. The first page was dated over a decade ago. The handwriting was neat, slanted, and familiar. Jason Hart, Batch Experiments. Morning buns, below it notes on yeast ratios, baking temperatures, test results. Then another page, then another. Jackson stood silent as she turned each one. He wrote everything down, Lena whispered. Every test, every failure, every idea. Her fingers landed on a recipe dated 2 weeks before the fire. It was labeled version 4.3, final. She tapped it. "This is the one we use now. Every morning." Jackson read the ingredient list. He had memorized the company's version years ago. It matched gram for gram. He didn't just want to make something good, Lena said. He wanted to make something lasting. She turned the page one last time. There, in bolder handwriting than the rest, was a phrase underlined twice. "Give credit always, even if no one's watching." Lena closed the notebook. "I think he would have liked you," she said quietly. Jackson's voice was rough when he answered. "I wish I'd met him, but maybe in a way he just had." 3 weeks later, the flagship Golden Harvest store in Seattle looked nearly the same. Same clatter of trays, same quiet buzz of ovens coming alive at dawn, same scent of cinnamon and brown sugar swirling through the air. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. Near the counter, a small bronze plaque had been installed. It read, "In honor of Jason Hart, whose recipe and resilience helped build this foundation. A true artisan, never forgotten." Lena passed it every morning without breaking stride. But something about seeing her brother's name out in the open, no longer hidden in a drawer or buried behind a product line, gave her spine a different kind of strength. She wore a new apron now, her title stitched beneath her name, Head of Artisan Product Development. Every day she showed up at 5:00 a.m., like before, but now not just to work dough. She mentored, listened, reviewed submissions with the legal team, and reminded every apprentice that brilliance isn't born from title, but from craft. Upstairs, Jackson Reeves stood silently behind the glass of the conference room. He'd watched her a dozen mornings now, but today felt different. Monica entered quietly and handed him a black coffee. Press picked up the story she said. "We're getting flooded with submissions from small-town bakers, hobbyists, even a retired schoolteacher in Ohio." Jackson gave a faint smile. "Good." She studied him for a beat. "You didn't do all this for Lena, did you?" He shook his head. "No, I did this for us." Monica waited. "I built Golden Harvest on one idea that value comes from the people who create it. But when I dug into that archive, when I realized our second most successful product was stolen and no one ever questioned it, I understood something terrifying." He set the coffee down, still untouched. If a company becomes big enough to steal and get away with it, it also becomes big enough to collapse under the weight of its own hypocrisy. He exhaled. This wasn't just an internal correction, it was a wake-up call. Because the moment we stop protecting the people who build what we sell, we stop having any right to exist. Downstairs, Lena was teaching two junior bakers how to fold dough into a new seasonal version of morning buns. One of them asked shyly, "What if someone steals this one too?" She glanced at the plaque on the wall. "They won't, but how do you know?" She looked over her shoulder up toward the glass where she knew Jackson usually stood, because now someone's watching, and someone finally cares who gets credit. That night, Jackson sat alone in his office. A letter lay open on his desk. Inside was the original version of Jason's formula, annotated, dated, signed. Lena had mailed it back to him along with a note, "Don't forget why this matters. For the next Jason, L.H." He read it once, then again, and as the city lights shimmered in the glass, he didn't feel proud. He felt responsible. This story was never about a stolen recipe. It was about a system that quietly taught creators to stay silent, and executives to assume credit. Golden Harvest didn't just owe Lena a paycheck. It owed Jason his name, and it owed every future creator something else, a promise. Not of profit, but of fairness, of acknowledgement, of dignity. Because if ideas are no longer protected, what value does effort hold? And if credit always follows power, not truth? What kind of justice are we really building? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced something like this or seen it happen to someone else? Share your story in the comments. And if these stories matter to you, don't forget to hit subscribe. More true stories of courage, justice, and second chances are coming soon.